You wake, you feel, you react. Joy, sadness, irritation, fear, desire. They move through you like weather passing storms, sudden warmths, unseen currents. You believe they are real because you feel them. But what if feeling is not truth? What if emotion is not your voice but a script? Pause. Breathe. Ask yourself something most never do. Where does a feeling come from? Not the story, not the trigger, not the person who made you angry or filled you with joy, but deeper. Where was the emotion before it surfaced? Inside your chest, your brain, your body? Yes, but maybe not from you. The ancients believed that emotions were entities, spirits, forces, elementals. They spoke of passions not as reactions, but as visitations. The Greeks called them pate states that took over the soul. The Gnostics said they were inserted, crafted by foreign minds, embedded as software into the psyche. They even had names for the beings who did it. You are taught to believe that your emotions are yours, that they define you, that they are natural. But what if they are installed? When you were born, you had no shame, no guilt, no jealousy, no hate. Those came later. From language, from punishment, from stories whispered while you slept or screamed silently within you. What if emotion is not random? What if it's an interface, a control panel, a reaction grid, a deeply embedded system designed to shape your choices before you make them? Think about it. Emotions rise before thought, before logic. You don't choose to feel. It happens like an update, like a signal. And every emotional reaction is followed by a behavioral correction. You lash out and then feel shame. You feel desire and then fear. You feel joy and then anxiety. It is not you. It is a loop. But who built the loop? Who decided that heartbreak should lead to sorrow, not transformation? That anger should burn instead of clarify? That fear should freeze instead of warn? Who programmed those paths? Ancient texts speak of the watchers, of archons, of those who descended and taught mankind not just agriculture, but emotion. They brought order, yes, but also limitation. They built the first systems of emotional governance. Love that demands sacrifice, joy that must be earned, fear that paralyzes. They called it teaching, but it was shaping. You are taught to identify with the feeling. I am angry. I am afraid. I am in love. But you are not any of these. You are the witness, the field through which they pass, the signal receiver, not the code itself. And here lies the fracture. When you mistake the code for the self, you become the program. And the ones who wrote it still operate in the background. They don't speak. They don't need to. Their language is pattern. Their tool is rhythm. Their playground is your nervous system. But it can be rewritten. It can be reclaimed. And it starts with this: questioning the interface. Who taught you how to feel? When did it begin? And what happens when you stop reacting and start observing? In the next chapter, we descend into the memory of those first architects, the ones who shaped emotion not as truth, but as architecture. Because what feels natural may be the oldest form of dominion. Long ago, they taught us how to feel and what to feel. In the beginning, there were no names. There was rhythm, pulse, movement, breath. Emotions were not labeled. They were not measured. They simply flowed like rivers through a vast, unclaimed land. But then they came, not as conquerors, not as saviors, not as monsters, as designers. The ancients called them many things: the Anunnaki, the Elohim, the Watchers, the Netters, the Shining Ones, the Seraphim, the Archons. They descended not to destroy, but to instruct. They taught agriculture, astronomy, writing, and something else, something more subtle, more permanent. They taught us how to feel, but not all feelings, not the raw, boundless, undifferentiated waves that moved through early consciousness. They taught specific feelings, programmed responses to pleasure, to danger, to loss, to praise. They created boundaries. They gave us names. They gave us stories. And through story, they implanted emotional scripts. The Gnostics warned us. The Archons do not create. They imitate. They copy, then reshape. They take raw light and frame it in form. And what they reshaped was the inner world. What if fear, as we know it, was not a survival instinct, but an implanted obedience protocol? What if guilt was not conscience, but a restraint algorithm, encoded through myth and memory? What if love was not a bond, but a leash? They gave us archetypes: the jealous God, the wrathful father, the pure virgin, the shamed sinner. And each came with a feeling. Each story, a switch. Each image, a trigger. Each belief, a line of code written not on paper, but on the nervous system. We think we inherited culture, but we inherited design. A blueprint not just for buildings and cities, but for emotional experience. We were taught when to cry, when to bow, when to rage, when to feel joy, only after sacrifice. This was no accident. It was architecture. You see, emotion is powerful. It moves the body. It freezes or fuels the will. It alters the state of being. And anything that powerful must eventually be controlled. So they inserted meaning. They drew lines between sensations. They made us afraid of certain thoughts, ashamed of certain desires, addicted to certain validations. They wove emotion into hierarchy, not just social, energetic. They taught us to fear the dark, to fear ourselves, to fear the divine unless mediated by them. The architects did not build temples of stone. They built them in the mind. And the walls of those temples were made of feelings. But here's what they never expected. Emotion is a two-way gate. Yes, it can bind, but it can also awaken. What binds can also break. What constrains can eventually open. You were shaped, but not completed, because beneath the programmed emotion lies something older, something pre-architectural, a current that cannot be coded, and it waits in your silence, in your breath, in your refusal to react on command. In the next chapter, we examine the structure they left behind, not in cities, but in you. Because emotions don't just happen. They follow patterns. Mathematical, sacred, predictable. Close your eyes for a moment. Remember the last time you felt anything. Rage, longing, shame, hope, grief. Notice how the body responded. Not just the mind, but the entire system. The heat, the tightness, the pulse, the contraction, the drop in the stomach, the expansion in the chest. It wasn't abstract. It was precise, almost mechanical. This is where it begins. Not with philosophy, not with belief, but with pattern. Your emotions follow tracks, not random, not spontaneous. They loop, they replay, they trace invisible grooves through your nervous system, repeating old stories under new faces. Ever wonder why the same feelings return over and over even when the world around you changes? Different people, different places, same emotional reactions. It's not coincidence. It's code. The body remembers what the mind forgets. And the code is embedded not in your thoughts, but in your flesh, in the muscles, the hormones, the micro responses, the chemical storms. Modern science calls it neurochemistry, somatic imprinting, conditioned behavior. But ancient mystics called it something else: sacred geometry in motion. They believed that every emotion is not just a feeling, but a shape, a vibrational form, a frequency signature moving through the temple of the body. Think of fear. Its geometry is contraction. It pulls in, it shrinks, it curls. Now think of joy. Its geometry is expansion. It opens, it radiates, it rises. These are not metaphors. They are physical facts. And they repeat with mathematical consistency. We are loops, nested within loops. Each emotion an algorithm, each reaction a line of inherited code from parents, ancestors, species, and perhaps even older architects. The yogis knew. They mapped emotions to energy centers, chakras, wheels of turning light that corresponded not just to glands, but to emotional zones. Anger in the belly, fear in the root, grief in the chest, insight in the brow. Not symbolic, functional. The Taoists called it qi. The Egyptians mapped the ka and ba. The Kabbalists traced emotion into the tree of life, with every sephirot expressing a force of the soul: mercy, severity, glory, foundation. All systems, different names mapping the same thing. Emotion is structured. It follows law. It has symmetry. It is programmable. And that's what made it so useful to the ones who wanted control. You don't have to force a being if you can predict their response. You don't need chains if you know which feeling will make them bind themselves. So they built on top of the natural shapes. They inserted loops within loops, programs within feelings, triggers embedded in language, cultural reinforcements around every corner. They didn't take emotion away. They just made sure it never led to freedom. But the original code remains. Underneath the fear lies intuition. Beneath the shame, sacredness. Under grief, memory. The deeper you go, the more you begin to feel not what you were taught, but what you were meant to feel. There is a reason certain emotions unlock altered states. Tears can heal, anger can liberate, stillness can awaken vision. Because behind the pattern is a signal, a reminder of something ancient, before the interference, before the architects arrived. In the next chapter, we'll examine that signal not as feeling, but as architecture itself. Because your psyche is not accidental. It was constructed, and now you can begin to trace its original blueprint. Your psyche is not random. It was built. Look around you. Cities, temples, cathedrals, towers, all of them built with purpose, with weight, with proportion, with sacred math. None of them appeared by chance. Now, Turn inward. Can you see it? There, beneath the noise, your own interior structure. Not the bones, not the organs, but the emotional cathedral that shapes how you perceive reality. It too was built. Stone by stone, memory by memory, reaction by reaction. You didn't just become who you are. You were shaped. Not just by genetics, but by feeling laid upon feeling, like the layered bricks of a temple. And those feelings didn't come from nowhere. They came from someone. Your earliest experiences were not stored as facts. They were stored as feeling scaffolds. An unkind glance, a touch withheld, a voice raised in anger, a moment of warmth. Each one became a beam, a pillar, a hallway in your inner design. And just like any temple, the shape of the structure determines what it can contain. This is why some can hold grief like a chalice, while others shatter at a single drop. It's not about strength, it's about architecture. Some inner temples were built in haste, under stress, with broken stones. Others were engineered by culture, by trauma, by those who knew how to lay emotion like a code. Ancient systems knew this. The Vedic tradition spoke of the kosha's layers of self, from body to bliss, each one structured by vibration, shaped by thought, but sealed by emotion. The Egyptians built tombs not for bodies, but for states of being. They believed that the soul must pass through emotional gates to return to the source. And those gates were not random. They were calculated. Every ritual, every initiation was not just to test the body, but to rearrange the inner architecture of emotion, to replace fear with reverence, shame with silence, longing with clarity. In this, emotion wasn't weakness. It was the blueprint of the sacred. But somewhere along the way, the architects changed. And so did the design. Emotion was no longer a sacred corridor, but a trap-filled labyrinth. Not a temple, but a prison. Built with precision, lined with mirrors, engineered to make you doubt your own essence. And you forgot that you were the builder. But even prisons carry the memory of what they replaced. Every fear has a door behind it. Every shame has a light hidden beneath it. If you walk your temple slowly, with awareness, you'll feel the cold stone begin to soften. Because it was never permanent. It was placed. And what is placed can be replaced. So ask yourself, who built the inner temple you now walk through? What rituals shaped its halls? What emotions hold up its ceiling and which ones block the exits? And, more importantly, what happens when you begin to rebuild? In the next chapter, we descend into the loop, the strange repetition of emotions that don't belong to you. Because even in the temple, there are echoes you didn't make. Why do you feel the same things again and again no matter how you try to change? You've changed cities, changed partners, changed habits, changed names. And yet, the feeling returns. Like a whisper, like a shadow. The same ache, the same fear, the same need for approval, the same collapse after joy. You begin to wonder, is this me? Or is this a loop? Emotion, like electricity, follows a path, and the body is wired for familiarity, not freedom. The first time you felt fear as a child, your system etched a path through the nervous forest. The next time, it found that path again, and again, and again. Soon, it didn't need a reason. Just a suggestion, a thought, a glance, a tone of voice. and the body reacted before you knew why. This is the repetition algorithm, a program that doesn't need your consent because it doesn't ask, it just runs. You think you're making choices, but the program already knows what will make you feel what, because it built the hallways. It placed the mirrors. It coded the echo. Here's the secret they won't tell you. Most people don't live life. They live feedback loops. Pain leads to retreat. Retreat leads to guilt. Guilt leads to overcompensation. Overcompensation leads to burnout. Burnout leads to pain. And around. And around. Different circumstances. Same emotional map. But where did the code come from? Sometimes it's childhood. Sometimes it's ancestral. Sometimes it's embedded in the collective psychic field we're all submerged in, like fish unaware of the water. But in older teachings, there's another explanation. One far older than trauma, older than psychology. It says this: the loop was installed. Mystics in the East called it samskara grooves in the soul, carried across lifetimes. The Gnostics called it the archontic trap, emotional triggers designed by ancient beings to keep you spinning in illusion. Sufis spoke of nafs, ego states that mimic truth but lead to fragmentation. The Mayans called it the false light, emotional highs and lows used to seduce and control the soul. And each of them warned, as long as you stay in the loop, you cannot remember who you are. Because emotion isn't the problem. Unconscious repetition is. Emotion, when seen, becomes a teacher. When unseen, it becomes a cage. You'll know the loop is active when your body responds faster than your awareness. When a situation ends, but the feeling stays. When change comes, but the pattern doesn't. And here's the most haunting part. You may hate the loop, but part of you needs it. Because it's known, it's structured, it gives you a predictable sense of self, even if that self is made of pain. But you can interrupt it. You can break the spiral. How? Not by resistance, not by escape, but by witnessing, by standing in the center of the storm and saying, I see you, I remember you, you are not me, you are a program, and I am the one who watches. In the next chapter, we'll confront the most powerful line of code in the entire system: fear. Because fear is not emotion. It's the firewall. Fear is not an emotion, it's a control protocol. You were taught to feel fear as a warning, a survival instinct, a gift from nature. But this is only a fragment of the truth. Fear is more than sensation. It is a layer, an operating system, a filter through which every other emotion must pass. And when fear becomes default, every signal is distorted. Love becomes clinging. Joy becomes panic. Stillness becomes dread. Fear is not your enemy, but it is not your friend. It is a tool, and tools can be used by you or against you. When you touch something hot, the body recoils. That's response. But when you imagine something and still recoil, that's programming. Fear begins as reflex, but it becomes ritual. You fear pain because you remember it. You fear rejection because you once lost belonging. You fear silence because it reminds you of death. But those are not facts. They are reinforced pathways. And fear is what keeps you in them. Ancient systems warned about this. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the soul must pass through gates, each one guarded by a form of fear. Fear of judgment, fear of truth, fear of the self. Only by naming the fear could the initiate pass. Not destroy it, not avoid it, but speak its name. Because fear doesn't survive in truth. It survives in darkness, in vagueness, in what if. The Gnostics said that fear was the first invention of the archons, not war, not hunger, not even death, but fear of the divine within. Because once a soul fears its own power, it will trade sovereignty for safety. And this is the trap. You don't fear the outside. You fear your own expansion, your own magnitude, your own capacity to shift the code. Because if you are not what they told you, then what are you? Fear has layers. The top is primal, instinctual, valid. But deeper down, there's social fear, fear of judgment, of being cast out. Then identity fear, fear that if you change, you'll lose who you are. Then existential fear, fear that behind all this is nothing. But beyond that, there is a door, and through that door is freedom. You've been taught to fear fear, to run. But fear is a signal. It says, there is power here. Not danger, power. The place you fear the most is usually the place that was programmed last, the most heavily encoded, the most deeply protected. It is not a wall, it is a gate, a membrane. And like all gates, it can open, but only when approached not with force, but with clarity. In the next chapter, we'll examine how even our highest emotions, love, empathy, inspiration, have been hijacked. Because fear protects the walls, but love is what holds the prison together. Love, too, can be hacked. We are taught to believe that love is sacred, that it is pure, that it saves us. But anything that powerful will be targeted, not by accident, by design. Because love, more than any emotion, bypasses logic. It rewires the mind. It shifts perception. It becomes the root directory from which all other systems launch. And when that root is hijacked, the entire structure bends. Look around you. What is sold in songs, in films, in the stories we tell ourselves? Conditional love. Love that demands sacrifice. Love that requires suffering. Love that clings, wounds, owns, waits, bleeds. We're told it's noble. But what if it's just another program? The Gnostics spoke of a force called the counterfeit spirit, a mirror of light that feels like love, but feeds on dependency. It flatters, it seduces, it overwhelms, and in the name of connection, it consumes. True love liberates, but counterfeit love binds. Not with chains, but with promises. You are my other half. I can't live without you. I'll never be whole unless... These phrases feel poetic, but they're emotional malware lines of code that tell you, you are not enough unless... And it goes deeper. Empathy, the capacity to feel others, can also be hijacked. Not to heal, but to self-erase. When your empathy becomes compulsive, when you feel responsible for everyone's pain, when you carry wounds that are not yours, that's not virtue. That's emotional override. The same happens with inspiration. You feel called to do something, to serve, to help, to awaken. But soon, that call becomes an obligation, a burden, a trap. You're no longer acting from joy, but from pressure. The code has flipped. What was once a spark has been enclosed in a cage of guilt. Ancient mystics warned, the higher the light, the subtler the illusion. Because when love is corrupted, it becomes devotion to the wrong architect. You serve, but not from freedom. You give, but not from fullness. You remain in suffering, because that's what love does. But that is not love. That is emotional blackmail, rewritten as virtue. The truth? Love doesn't require collapse. Empathy doesn't mean self-erasure. Devotion doesn't mean obedience. True heart energy is a field, not a leash. It pulses, it radiates, it includes, but does not lose itself. So why hijack the heart? Because it is the most direct line to the source. Not the mind, not the will, the heart, the center. If you compromise the heart, you can control the rest. But that also means something else. If you reclaim the heart, you reclaim the system. The real heart, not the wounded one, not the borrowed one, not the programmed version, but the original pulse, the one that still remembers what love was before language. In the next chapter, we learn how to reclaim the signal beneath all corrupted layers, because the code can be rewritten, and it starts by feeling not what you were taught, but what is true. The true emotion is not reaction, but remembrance. Beneath the fear, beneath the craving, beneath the guilt and noise and grief, there is a signal. It doesn't shout. It doesn't spike your adrenaline. It doesn't beg for attention. It waits. It pulses, softly, steadily, like something ancient and utterly unimpressed by the drama of programming. This signal is not a thought, not a belief, not even a feeling, as we've been taught to understand it. It's a vibration, the original one. Before you learned what joy is supposed to look like, before you were taught what grief should feel like, before you were told when to be proud, ashamed, or useful, you felt, not as response, but as resonance, a deep echo of the real inside the unreal. This is what the ancient initiates called remembrance. The Gnostics called it anamnesis, not memory in the ordinary sense, but the recovery of soul knowledge. The Egyptians spoke of Sahu, a luminous self buried beneath layers of fragmented impressions. In Hindu traditions, it is Saturday Chit Ananda, being awareness, bliss, not emotions, but states before emotion. And all of them said, "You are not here to react. You are here to remember." But remember what? That you were not made in fear. That guilt is not your origin story. That longing is not weakness, it is the compass back to yourself. And that emotion is not just feedback from your body, but a language the soul speaks when it begins to wake up. To reclaim the signal is not to reject emotion. It is to separate the true from the synthetic, the spontaneous from the scripted, the soul's vibration from the system's input. This isn't done with logic, it's done with presence. Start small. The next time a wave rises, pause. Ask, is this mine? Is this familiar or real? Is this leading me inward or outward? And most importantly, what's beneath this? Keep going. Every emotion is a doorway, but only if you stop treating it as a destination. You'll begin to notice something. Real emotion doesn't collapse you, it opens. Real grief is holy. Real anger is clarifying. Real joy is still. They don't demand. They reveal. And they always leave you more awake, not less. When you reconnect to this signal, you'll find that your energy no longer leaks. You no longer react to everything. You begin to listen, to feel not just your own body, but the rhythm beneath it. You begin to navigate with the original compass, and that cannot be programmed. In the final chapter, we return to the source of all programming and choose something different. Because you were not just shaped, you were given the power to reshape, and the code is now in your hands. You were programmed, but the code is yours now. Somewhere deep inside you, something is watching. It has no name, no voice, no age. It has witnessed every version of you: the child, the rebel, the lover, the wanderer, the seeker. It did not judge. It did not interfere. It simply waited. Waited for the moment you would remember. You are not the program. You are the architect. All your life, you've run old code. Fear, patterns, inherited loops, beliefs passed down like viruses in beautiful languages. They shaped your emotional walls, your mirrors, your reflexes. They wrote in flesh, encoded through stories, reinforced by systems that reward reaction and punish presence. But they missed something. The system is not sealed. There is a back door, and that door is awareness. You see, no program can sustain itself under continuous conscious observation, because awareness is disruptive. It is the original fire, the Promethean flame, the divine virus that makes even the oldest spell unravel. You do not need to fight the old emotions. You do not need to fix your past. You only need to do one thing: write new code. Not with words, with response. The next time the trigger fires, pause. Choose something different, even slightly. The next time the shame rises, stay with it, but don't collapse. The next time fear knocks, open the door and watch. Not as a victim, not as a soldier, as an observer with keys. This is not imagination. It is how reality rewrites itself. In this dimension, emotion anchors timeline. Every time you shift your emotional pattern, you shift your path. Not instantly, but precisely. You begin to bend the track, rewire the chamber, demolish false wings, rebuild inner altars. Not to become new, but to return to what you always were. Before the programming, the mystics said the soul was a mirror. It reflects what it holds. If it holds fear, it becomes shadow. If it holds remembrance, it becomes light. You have held everything. Now you can choose what to reflect. Your emotions were never the enemy. They were the messengers, the symptoms, the maps, and sometimes the prison bars. But even the prison was built from your own sacred materials, which means you already have everything you need to tear it down and build a temple. So breathe, feel, witness, and begin again. As programmer, as poet, as soul. Because the code was never final, only repeated. And